Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. This is my second video today, the second video at the park. I just completed a short while ago my video about the Kowa 180, and since it's such a beautiful day and I have a little bit of time, which is really unusual for me, I decided to make a second video and about another rather hard to find and interesting vintage Japanese camera, and that is the Ricoh 35 Deluxe. Now, Ricoh had been producing rangefinder cameras in Japan for some years after the war, and there were a large variety of these cameras made. The earlier ones were the Ricoh LED cameras, which were a rather conventional 35mm camera with a winding knob on the top and a shutter charging system on the front. And then these were replaced by a different version of the Ricoh LED, which had kind of a focusing ring on the front, kind of like Contax or Nikon cameras, but on the front of the lens rather than on the camera body. And then they introduced the 35 series, like this one here, which for the most part featured a trigger winding system on the bottom. And then after that they introduced the 300 style cameras, which were more conventional rangefinder cameras with a winding lever on the top, and design which was popular all the way through the 1960s and early 1970s. The Ricoh 35 Deluxe is kind of an odd camera in that it kind of filled the gap or took up the space between the earlier Ricoh LED style cameras and the later cameras with the trigger wind system, because unlike either of these cameras, this one features both systems. We have a film winding and shutter charging knob on the top, or you can use the trigger winding system on the bottom. It's really an interesting system, and I really like this one because though these are really rugged and reliable cameras, and the later ones with the trigger winding system were, sometimes I've had problems with the trigger winding system. There's kind of a metal tab on the bottom where when you wind it, it sometimes doesn't catch and wind the film properly. So it's really nice to have this film winding knob on the top as kind of a backup or an alternate way of operating the camera. This particular camera, the Ricoh 35 Deluxe, was released in I think 1956 or so, and it's quite a very well made and easy to use camera, even though it looks a little bit odd compared to other cameras you might be familiar with. Sales of this camera were quite good, and good enough that Ricoh built upon this design and improved it with other models, such as a later deluxe model, the 519 model, the S2 model, and such. This particular model comes with a 45mm f2.8 lens. Later models came with a 2.4 lens or an f2 lens or even an f1.9 lens. Though the lenses all have different maximum apertures, they are all excellent performers. And though a lot of people prefer the faster lenses, and I kind of fall into the group where I like faster lenses, I find that in practice I very rarely actually use the widest apertures on these old cameras. You get the best performance out of most lenses at around f8 or so, and that's usually around where I try to shoot with the cameras, because of course I want the best possible results when I'm shooting. So the price difference between an f2.8 and an f1.9 camera can be kind of significant, but performance difference is actually very small. So the 2.8 or 2.4 lens models are probably a better value than the faster f2 or f1.9 cameras. So we'll go ahead and take a look at the features and functions of the Ricoh 35 Deluxe, starting on the top. Here we have the film rewind knob, which has a fold-out lever to make it a little bit easier to wind or rewind the film. We have a flash shoe, and unlike many other cameras of the era, the Ricohs came with a hot flash. So it's not, if you have a newer flash, a modern strobe flash, it's quite easy to use one on all these early Ricoh cameras without having to use a sync cord or sync cord adapter. Just stick your flash on and follow the directions on the flash and you're good to go. Over here we have a screw on the top here, which is an access screw for adjusting the rangefinder. Over here on the right side we have the shutter release button. But this particular camera does not use a standard cable release. You can get an adapter which will allow you to use the cable release, and it threads in around the button on the top. And of course here we have, as I mentioned previously, a film winding knob, and it also has the film counter dial located on the top. On the back here we have the viewfinder window. This screws and unscrews, and if you're going to remove the top from the camera to clean the rangefinder, you kind of have to remove this in order to do it. You can clean it a little bit by unscrewing the eyepiece here and reaching inside, cleaning behind it and the back side of the focusing screen, and that will clear it up a little bit. But do be careful when you're cleaning, because you can rub the reflective coating off of the beam splitting mirror. Over here we have the release lever, which you push over to the side, and that allows you to rewind the film inside the camera. Being that this is a rangefinder camera, as I always say, a fixed lens rangefinder camera, the important controls are located on the lens body. Here we have the focusing ring and focusing tab, and we have a distance scale measured in feet on this particular camera, and we have a depth of field scale located here where my finger is pointing. Before that we have the aperture ring, and in the front of that we have the shutter speed ring, and this camera features a full range of shutter speeds from 1 second to 1/500th of a second. I'll go ahead and wind it here. Like other rangefinder cameras, it's a good idea to set the shutter speed before you cock the shutter. On this particular camera, you won't be able to select the 1/500th speed if the shutter is already cocked. There's a booster spring on it to give it the extra speed, or the extra leverage to reach 1/500th of a second. And if the shutter is already cocked, you're not going to be able to turn it from 1/250th to 1/500th of a second. And of course, on the front here, we have the 45mm f2.8 lens. On the bottom here we have a fold down trigger for the trigger winding system for the camera, which is quite easy to use. And also on the bottom we have a tripod socket located to the side here, and this accepts a standard 1/4 inch tripod head. And over here we have a kind of the indicator here, which you use to show what film speed you have loaded in the camera. Loading and unloading film on these cameras, the Ricoh 35 series, is a little bit difficult because you have to unlock both of these knobs here. They both have indicators on either side which go from C to O. O is marked in red. So you turn both of these rings to O and you slide off the film back like so. Set it in a safe place or stick it under your arm. Take your film canister and slide it up in the canister chamber here, and stretch the film lead across the film chamber and feed it into the take-up spool. One of the good things about this particular camera with this kind of combined film winding system is it makes it much easier to start the film than the later versions which have only the trigger winder. When you're winding the film, make sure that the holes on either side of the film engage the teeth on the take-up sprocket, or the film won't wind, and you'll find that after you think you've shot all the film in the camera that you haven't actually shot any of it. One problem these cameras often suffer from is a frozen focus helicoid. Maybe 1/3 of these cameras which I get, the focusing helicoid is locked and doesn't work. That is not so difficult to fix in these cameras. If you look in the back here, you can see kind of the round nut which holds in the shutter assembly, and there's a gap between it, and there's another ring around the outside of it. In between these two rings are the helicoid threads. So what I do to fix the frozen focus helicoid is I put some oil between these two rings and let it run down into the threads. And I'll add a little bit of thinner, like naphtha or lighter fluid or some kind of paint thinner. And that allows the oil to penetrate into the lens helicoid. I'll go ahead and sit the camera on a flat surface in this position overnight. And then usually the next day, if you give the focus ring a good twist, it'll come loose and it'll start working again. Once you have the film loaded in the camera, place the film back carefully, not on the bottom here because the pressure plate will catch. You want to put it about here. So the pressure plate is pushing on the back of the film, and both sides of the film door are engaged in the slots on the camera, and then push it upward, hold it down with your thumb, and then turn both rings to the CA or closed position. And then you are all set. So, anyway, that's it about the Ricoh 35 Deluxe. I'll be putting this camera up for sale shortly on my new online store, JapanVintageCamera.com, as well as my Etsy and eBay stores. If you're interested in buying this camera or another vintage Japanese camera, please check out my stores. I'll post links to them in the description below the video. If you'd like to see more videos about vintage Japanese cameras or photography in Japan, please subscribe. I'll be posting more videos shortly. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.